On the very morning I was meant to bury my husband, when grief already felt heavier than my own body, a stranger's hand slipped a plain envelope into mine, and inside was a single line that stopped my breath cold. It said, "Don't go to your husband's funeral, check your sister's house, she's not alone." And in that instant, I knew my life was about to break open in ways I could never have imagined. Thank you so much for watching and being here with me. I truly appreciate your time, and I would love if you could comment where you are watching from, because it warms my heart to know how far my words can travel. My name is Mary, and I live in the quiet stretches of Ohio, where the seasons change in ways that remind you how fast life can move, and how quickly everything you thought was steady can slip away. I never imagined I would one day sit and tell a story like this, because my life, though never perfect, was one I thought I understood, one I thought I could depend on. For many years I believed in family, I believed in love, and I believed that the people closest to me would protect me. But as I held that envelope on the day of my husband's funeral, my entire belief in what I thought I knew began to unravel in my hands. I remember, the paper was thin, folded once, no handwriting I recognized, no name on the outside, just those chilling words inside. Words that seemed too cruel to even consider, and yet they lodged themselves deep in my heart, refusing to let go. I wanted to dismiss it as a bitter prank, the kind of thing someone heartless might do to mock a grieving woman, but there was something in my gut, something sharp and heavy, that told me I could not ignore it. The letter burned in my palm as though it carried its own heat, and I kept asking myself, who would send this to me now, on this day, when I was already so broken, unless it carried a truth someone wanted me to see. Standing there in black, surrounded by mourners whose voices blurred into one endless hum, I felt as if the world had split in two. The part of me that wanted to stay rooted in grief, clinging to what I had been told, and the part of me that felt a whisper of warning, telling me to step away, to follow where those words were leading. My heart pounded against my ribs, my breath came in shallow bursts, and though my mind screamed at me that it was nonsense, my spirit whispered something different. And it was in that moment, holding on to nothing but my trembling hands and that single line of ink, that I knew I had to choose. Either stay and bury the man I thought I loved, or walk away and discover what kind of truth was hiding behind my sister's door. I still remember how heavy my legs felt as I walked away from the chapel that morning, as if every step was a betrayal to the grief I was supposed to be carrying, because people were watching, whispering, wondering why I was leaving when the coffin had not yet been lowered. But I could not explain, not even to myself, why I suddenly had to know what waited for me at my sister's house. The road seemed longer than ever, the weight of memories pressing down with every mile, memories of the life I had built with him, the home we shared, the laughter that once filled our rooms before silence slowly replaced it. I thought about how I had met him when I was just a young woman with more dreams than sense, how his smile had seemed to promise protection and love, how I believed that marrying him would mean safety, companionship, and years of shared joy. For so long I convinced myself that even in the quiet, even in the distance that grew between us, there was still something real, something worth holding on to. Because that is what you do when you love someone. You hope, you forgive, you tell yourself the best is yet to come. And then I thought about my sister, the one person I trusted without hesitation, the one who was there when I was too tired to go on, the one who held my hand through sickness, who sat with me during lonely nights, who promised me that no matter what, we would always have each other. She was the one I confided in when he stayed out too late, when the arguments turned into cold silences, when my heart began to ache in ways I could not explain. She always listened, always told me to be patient, always soothed me with her gentle words, and I believed her because sisters are supposed to protect you, not wound you deeper. I never once thought she was capable of betrayal. Not her, not the woman who shared my blood, not the one who knew my secrets and my weaknesses better than anyone. As I drove with that envelope sitting on the seat beside me, it felt almost alive, as though it was watching me, daring me to keep going. And with every turn of the wheel, the doubts grew louder. What if this was all in vain? What if I reached her house and found nothing but silence? What if I was letting grief twist my mind into shadows and suspicion? And yet deep inside there was a knot in my stomach, a knowing I could not shake. The kind of instinct that only comes when your soul is warning you that danger has been close all along. I thought back to the small moments I ignored. The perfume on his shirt that wasn't mine, the hushed phone calls that ended when I entered the room, the way my sister sometimes avoided my eyes when I spoke of him, as if she was hiding a truth too heavy to carry. By the time I pulled up to her house, my hands were trembling on the wheel, my chest tight with both dread and determination. The familiar sight of her porch felt strange, almost foreign, and yet I knew it better than my own, because how many nights had I sat there with her, sharing coffee, whispering secrets, trusting her with the deepest corners of my heart. And as I reached under the little garden gnome where I knew the spare key still lay hidden, I realized I was not just opening a door. I was about to unlock the truth that would change everything I thought I knew about loyalty, love, and family. The key felt colder in my hand than I expected, and for a moment I stood there frozen, staring at the door I had walked through so many times before, a door that once meant comfort and family, now looming like a gate to something I was not ready to face. My breath caught in my throat as I slid the key into the lock, every small sound echoing in my ears, louder than the voices of the mourners I had left behind at the chapel. When the door creaked open, the smell of her house rushed over me, familiar yet unsettling, the faint trace of lavender she always loved, mixed with something sharper, something that did not belong. I stepped inside slowly, my footsteps pressing against the carpet where we once laughed together, and for a heartbeat I almost wished I had turned back. Almost wished I had stayed at the funeral and buried my questions along with the coffin. But it was too late. I was already inside. My eyes wandered, and then I saw it, sitting against the wall in the hallway, a suitcase I knew too well, the same one my husband carried on every trip, the same one I had packed for him countless times, folding his shirts with care, tucking in his cologne at the side, because he never liked to leave without it. The scent was still there, strong and unmistakable, wrapping around me like a cruel ghost of recognition, and my knees nearly gave way beneath me as I reached out to touch it, to make sure I was not imagining things. It was real. His clothes were real. His life was here, not gone, not buried, not mourned. I pressed my hand to my mouth, trying to silence the storm rising in my chest, but nothing could quiet the truth that screamed louder with every second. The man I thought was dead was still alive, and he was here. Then, from upstairs came the sound that shattered me completely. A voice, soft and careless, humming the tune I had heard him hum countless nights when he thought no one was listening. It was his voice, so clear, so undeniable, and for a moment the world tilted, as if everything inside me collapsed under the weight of betrayal I could no longer deny. My heart raced with fury, grief, and disbelief all at once, and I clutched the banister to steady myself, staring up the staircase that no longer looked like wood and carpet, but like a path to the deepest wound I had ever been forced to walk. And as I stood there in that silence, broken only by his humming, I knew the truth. He had not only faked his death, he had done it with her help, and the two people I trusted most had chosen to bury me instead of burying him. I stood there frozen at the bottom of the staircase, my whole body trembling as though the ground beneath me was no longer steady, my ears straining to catch every note of that humming because I still could not believe it. I did not want to believe it. Yet it was him. It was the same sound that once brought me comfort in the quiet of our home, now piercing me like a blade. My eyes wandered back to the suitcase, to the shirts folded neatly inside, to the shoes lined at the corner as if he had just arrived from a journey, and I felt the air in my lungs fight to stay because my mind was spinning with questions I never imagined I would have to ask. Why would he do this? Why would my own husband pretend to be dead? Why would my own sister be part of such cruelty? And how long had they been weaving this web of lies behind my back, while I gave them nothing but trust? Every memory of him rushed into my head all at once. The years of marriage where I held on even when his love felt thin, the nights I stayed up waiting for him to come home, the way I brushed off whispers from others that something seemed off, convincing myself that loyalty meant staying even when my heart was breaking. And my sister, the one I had always turned to, the one I believed would never betray me. I could see her face in my mind, the softness of her smile, the way she hugged me at the chapel that very morning, whispering condolences. And now I realized those arms carried not comfort but deception. Those words carried not kindness but guilt. My legs shook as I took a step toward the stairs, the banister cool under my palm, and with every creak of the wood beneath my feet, the truth grew heavier inside me. The betrayal no longer hidden in shadows but laid bare before me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to collapse right there on the floor and let grief swallow me whole. But another part of me, the part that had endured every quiet pain in silence, told me to keep moving, to see it with my own eyes. Because only then could I know just how deep the wound truly went. And with each step upward, the sound of his voice grew clearer, pulling me into the cruel reality that the man I thought I had lost forever was not only alive, but alive in the arms of the one person who should have protected me most. When I reached the top of the stairs, my heart was beating so violently, I thought it might give me away. And I stood there for a moment in the narrow hallway, my hand pressed against the wall to keep from falling as the sound of their voices drifted out from behind the door at the end, voices I knew better than my own. I heard his laugh first, low and easy, the very laugh I had mourned when they lowered an empty coffin into the earth, and then hers followed, warm and soft, the same voice that had once comforted me in my darkest hours, now tangled with his, in a way that made my stomach turn. Every instinct in me wanted to burst in, to tear open that door and confront them both in their sin, but something inside held me back, telling me to listen, to let their own words deliver the proof I dreaded yet needed. I leaned closer, my body trembling with the effort to stay silent, and their whispers painted a picture I could hardly bear to see. They spoke of plans, of money that would soon be theirs, of flights already booked, and I realized with a sharp ache that the letter was not a lie. It was a warning, a lifeline thrown to me by someone who must have known what they had done. I heard her say she was glad the policy was in order, that soon they would be free in a place far from here, and I gripped the wall so tightly my fingers ached, because she was speaking of my life as if it were nothing, as if my grief, my tears, my shattered trust were just details in their escape. And then he spoke of me, his voice cruel and careless, saying I was too naive to ever suspect, that I had always been too blind, too loyal, too trusting to see the truth even when it was before my eyes. My heart broke in a way that words cannot describe, because it was not death that stole him from me. It was choice, it was deceit, it was betrayal at its most merciless form. In that moment, I understood that I had not only lost a husband, I had lost a sister, and I had lost the belief that blood or vows could protect me from the cruelty of human greed. And yet, beneath the sorrow, a new strength began to stir, quiet but certain, because I knew this was not the end of my story. Not the way they imagined, for the same silence they counted on to keep me blind would become the silence that gave me the power to act. I stepped back from that door with my chest tight and my vision blurred, because the weight of their betrayal pressed against me so hard, it felt like it might crush me right there in the hallway. But even through the tears that stung my eyes, I felt something rising in me that I had not expected. A steady resolve that whispered, I would not let them win. For years I had carried the burdens of loyalty, for years I had excused the distance, the secrets, the lies, and for years I had convinced myself that family meant forgiveness, no matter the cost. But in that moment I realized forgiveness was a gift they had never deserved, and the only gift I owed myself was freedom. I remembered the night just days before his so-called heart attack, when something inside me urged me to change the life insurance papers, my hand shaking as I signed my name, not even knowing why I felt it so deeply in my bones that it had to be done. And now standing in my sister's hallway, the truth of that instinct burned like fire through me, because it meant that their plan was already broken before it began. As I walked back down the stairs, every step steadier than the last, I thought of all the years I had poured myself into loving people who saw me only as a means to their own desires. And for the first time in my life, I felt no need to cry, no need to scream, no need to beg for answers that would never heal me. What I felt instead was power. Quiet but fierce. The kind of power that comes when you finally stop asking why someone hurt you and start deciding that they will never have the chance to do it again. I knew I would not expose myself that day. I would not storm into that room and let them see me broken, because what they feared most was not my pain but my silence, not my anger but my strength, and I would carry that strength with me as I walked out of the house. The suitcase was still sitting by the wall when I passed it, mocking me with its familiarity, but this time I looked at it differently, not as a symbol of what I had lost, but as a reminder of what I had survived. And when I stepped out into the sunlight, I breathed deeper than I had in years. Because though they thought they had buried me, I was the one standing above ground, with the truth in my hands. They had chosen lies, they had chosen greed, they had chosen to throw me into the fire, but they had forgotten one thing. Some fires don't destroy, some fires forge, and I was no longer the woman who believed love would save me. I was the woman who would save herself. When I closed the door behind me and left that house, I carried no rage in my steps, only a heavy silence that spoke louder than any words could have, because I understood now that true power was not in shouting or exposing them too soon, but in holding the truth quietly, letting it sharpen me like a blade they could not see coming. As I walked to my car, the sun seemed different, harsher against my skin, as if the whole world knew what I had just uncovered, yet I kept my head high, because I refused to let their betrayal twist me into the broken woman they expected me to be. Instead, I thought of what lay ahead, of the choices I still had, of the ways I could reclaim what they tried to steal. And that thought filled me with a strength I had never felt before. I sat behind the wheel with my hands gripping the steering tightly, my breath steadying as I reminded myself that I had already taken the first step without even realizing it. The change I made to the insurance policy had shifted the ground beneath their plans before they even had the chance to escape, and that alone gave me a quiet satisfaction that no one could take away. They thought I was blind. They thought I was weak. They thought my love had made me powerless. But what they never understood was that love had also made me cautious. It had made me alert. It had made me recognize when something did not feel right, and that instinct had become my shield. Driving away, I imagined the moment they would discover the truth, the moment they realized their careful plotting had led them not to freedom but to ruin. And I pictured their faces, pale and desperate when the world no longer bent in their favor. It was not revenge I craved, it was justice. The simple justice of knowing that I had survived them, that I had stood in the fire they built for me and walked out stronger than they ever expected. My heart was still bruised, yes, but it no longer beat for them. It beat for me, for my survival, for the life I would continue to live with dignity. And as the road stretched ahead, I whispered to myself that they could never bury me, because I had already dug myself out, and now it was their turn to be buried under the weight of their own choices. The days that followed moved slowly, each one heavy with the weight of what I had discovered, yet strangely I felt lighter than I had in years. Because the truth, no matter how painful, freed me from the illusions I had been living under. I went about my routines carefully, quietly, keeping my secrets close to my chest, never letting on that I knew the coffin we lowered had been filled with nothing but lies, and that the tears shed at the funeral were for a man who was not gone, but hiding in the arms of my own sister. Every time I passed the mirror, I studied my face, searching for signs of the woman they thought I was. The naive wife, the blind sister, and I realized she no longer existed. She had been replaced by someone sharper, someone unshakable, someone who had walked through betrayal and come out with her dignity intact. I thought of them often, not with longing but with a strange kind of distance, as though they had become characters in a story that no longer belonged to me, and I wondered how long it would take before they realized their plan was crumbling. I pictured them whispering together, making promises of a life far away, counting money that was never going to come, and I almost pitied them. But pity is a gift, and I had none left to give. What I carried instead was a sense of calm justice, because they had chosen deceit, they had chosen greed, and they had chosen to erase me. But in the end, it was their own choices that would erase them. At night, when I sat alone in my living room, I no longer cried the way I once did. I no longer prayed for answers I knew would never come. Instead, I prayed for strength, for clarity, for the patience to let time reveal its justice. The silence of my house was no longer lonely, it was peaceful, because I had finally reclaimed it for myself. I locked my doors not out of fear, but out of certainty, knowing that what they had tried to take from me, my life, my trust, my peace, was beyond their reach now. And as I sat there, steady in the quiet, I promised myself that, no matter what happened next, I would never again let their shadows darken my light. It was not long before whispers began to reach me, quiet hints carried by neighbors who spoke without knowing the whole story. Little murmurs about my sister being seen too often behind closed curtains, about a man's shadow moving across her window at night, about how something in her eyes looked different, guilty, restless. I never asked questions. I never revealed that I already knew. I simply listened, nodding softly, letting their words confirm what my heart had already seen, and with every rumor, my resolve grew stronger. I realized then that I did not need to expose them myself, because life has a way of pulling the covers off lies, one small thread at a time, until the whole fabric comes undone. I carried myself with calmness in those days, going to work, paying my bills, speaking politely in town, and never once did I let them see me break. I wanted them to wonder, to question why I was not grieving the way they expected, why I seemed steadier than ever when they believed they had ruined me. That was my quiet victory. The dignity of not letting their betrayal define me, but allowing my silence to speak louder than any accusation ever could. And when I heard that they were making plans again, whispering about flights and a future far from here, I smiled to myself, because I knew what they did not. The policy they had pinned their hopes on was no longer in their grasp. The money they thought would free them was never coming, and soon they would discover that every step they took toward escape would only carry them deeper into ruin. It gave me peace to know that while they thought they were clever, I had been the one holding the final piece all along. And though they once tried to bury me with lies, I was the one still standing in the light of truth. When the truth finally reached them, when the papers came back and they realized the money they had counted on was gone, their world began to crumble in ways I could almost feel through the silence they left behind. I heard from a neighbor that my sister had been seen arguing in the driveway, her voice raised, his face red with fury, and though I was not there to witness it, I could imagine it clearly. The moment they turned on each other, blaming, accusing, tearing at the very bond they thought would outlast me. It was almost poetic, because the same greed that had tied them together was now the same weight pulling them apart, and the destruction they had planned for me was now devouring them instead. I never needed to confront them again, never needed to throw their betrayal back in their faces, because their downfall was written into the choices they made, and all I had to do was let time take its course. People in town began to notice too. The whispers grew louder, and soon what they had tried to hide was no longer a secret at all, their shame spilling into every corner of their lives. I walked with my head high through it all, never once lowering my eyes, never once speaking their names, because I had learned that the greatest revenge is not revenge at all, but peace. The kind of peace that comes when you know you have survived, and they have not. There were nights I thought of what might have been if love and loyalty had meant to them what it meant to me. And yes, the sadness still came, heavy and slow, but it no longer crushed me. It only reminded me of who I had become, a woman who had faced betrayal from both husband and sister, and yet stood unbroken. And as I closed my curtains each evening and sat in the quiet of my home, I felt stronger with every breath, knowing that I did not need their apology. I did not need their words, because the life I reclaimed was louder than any excuse they could ever give. With time, I began to notice how different the air felt around me. Lighter, calmer, no longer heavy with suspicion or doubt. And I realized that even though betrayal had broken my heart, it had also freed me from illusions I had carried for too long. I no longer looked at my life through the eyes of a woman waiting for someone else to give her love or loyalty. I looked at it through the eyes of a survivor who had given everything and still stood tall. The house that once felt so empty after his so-called death became a place of peace again, because every room now echoed not with lies but with the sound of my own strength. I filled my days with small joys, the kind of moments I once overlooked, cooking meals just for myself, sitting by the window with a book, taking quiet walks and lifting my head high when neighbors greeted me, because I wanted them to see that betrayal had not destroyed me, it had refined me. I heard their names less often as the months passed, as if the world itself was beginning to erase them from my story. And though I knew they still lived in the shadows of their choices, I no longer let their presence trouble my spirit. They had made their bed, and I no longer cared if it was comfortable or not, for I had learned that carrying their sins on my shoulders was a weight I did not deserve. Instead, I carried only dignity, the knowledge that I had endured the deepest cut and still kept my grace. Sometimes at night, when the silence was soft, I would think back to the day of that letter, to the trembling of my hands as I read those words, and I would smile faintly because what was meant to destroy me had instead opened my eyes and set me free. And in that freedom, I found not revenge, but the sweetest justice of all, the life they could not take from me. Looking back now, I see that what they thought would be my ending became my beginning. Because they buried themselves in lies while I rose in truth, and though the scars of their betrayal will always be a part of me, they no longer define me. They remind me of how strong a heart can be when it refuses to break. I no longer carry their names on my lips. I no longer carry their shadows in my home. Instead, I carry peace. The kind that comes from knowing you walked through the fire and kept your dignity. And for that, I will always be grateful, not to them, but to myself, for choosing to stand tall when everything tried to bring me down. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of my story. It means more to me than I can say. And if you felt something in my words, I invite you to subscribe, to join me again, and to share your own truth in the comments below.